So, I think why don't we start? Hold on. How do I? Oh, this is nothing, right? Okay. So first of all, a big welcome to all of you, old friends and new friends, to China Club for this event. Maybe first of all, I will introduce who I am, and then a few words about the Berggruen Institute. I'm a senior vice president at Berggruen Institute and director of China Center. A few words about the Berggruen Institute. Some of you may not know much about us. First of all, we are a global platform for creative thinkers. Okay, so we would like to think ourselves as an incubator and co-creator of innovative ideas and fresh thinking in an era of great transformations and polycrisis. This is a very trendy word, polycrisis. We actually work in the intersection of a frontier science and technology, philosophy, and art. So I know there's a lot of artists in the audience today. So of course we have philosophers as well. I don't know whether now we have technologists, do we? And we have 3 intellectual centers. We're headquartered in Los Angeles, and then we also have a Europe center, which is headquartered in Venice. And then the 3rd intellectual center we have is actually at Peking University in Beijing. Through programs and activities of these 3 centers, we really extend our reach and networks globally. I would say the particular methodology or angle that we're very much interested in is we're really interested in the foundational thinking. Essentially, the ideas, concepts, and the methodologies that undergird our conceptions of the world and our actions. Some of you may know that Berggruen Institute, we have this once-a-year Berggruen Prize of Philosophy and Culture. It's been 8 years in the running already, so we award $1 million to still living and influential thinker of the world. So we're very much interested in philosophy and then culture. So, and then our methodology is really cross-culture, cross areas, and cross-disciplinary. So today is, today's event is really sort of typical of cross-culture philosophical dialogues. And then this is something that, our institute does on a regular basis, the kinds of work. But this type of dialogue is somewhat, our first attempt. So, and then I say a few words about the origin of this dialogue and the series. In fact, this is the first of the series we're going to have on foundational ideas in Western and Eastern philosophies. And then this is something that actually, on and off for several years, I've been talking with Tobias, who's a dear friend, former colleague, and a very creative and deep thinker. And then subsequently, we follow up discussions with Xiangchen, who's a philosopher based in Shanghai, who's also a very deep and insightful thinker. So this is the series we've been discussing on and off for several years, actually. So I think, we want to focus on foundational ideas in Eastern and Western philosophies. I think those ideas are foundational because they have shaped the basic structure and orientation of our thinking. Okay, so that's what we mean by foundational. And then, see, I need some notes. Okay, why it is important? Can we flick to the next? Why do we think it's important? If you look at this picture, this is an iceberg, and then you see the tip of the iceberg, and then that's the sort of the modern and globalized world we're living. You look around, that's something that you have access to every day. Global economy, financial market movements, military actions, and geopolitical tension, and this and that. We feel we live in a globalized world. We feel we live in the same world, physically and conceptually. But this is not true at all. Let's go to the second one. So that's what you see. What we see is the tip of the iceberg. And then what we want to discuss here is go underneath this iceberg. And then we really want to look at the deep notions and some of these sort of axiomatic precepts that we take as self-evident truth. This is not just for the Chinese or the East Asians. It's also for Germans and the Westerners in general. We take certain things for granted, thinking that they're universal, thinking that everyone else would share the same deep notions and ideas. And then so that's today we want to focus on. But in fact, I mean, those ideas, they actually shaped us in such a way that we don't even question them anymore. So we don't surface those ideas to the explicit awareness anymore. In Chinese, we call it 百姓日用而不知. Okay, this is the kind of the concept we want to look into. They're so deep in our psyche. We don't question them anymore. We don't surface them anymore. But they really shape and direct how we think, how we act every day. They really shape and then and direct all the clusters of notions and activities at the tip of the iceberg that we often focusing on, right? So that's what we want to do. So in a way, what they're going to be discussing is really, we're going to dive into the ancient history and then to trace the origin of the notions. And then we're going to also point out the contemporary implications. They're not just the ancient history of the past. They really shape and then direct what we think and how we act today. I think today's a lot of the problems we face in this world is that we only stay at that surface. And then we constantly squabbling with each other without understanding why we get into this dilemma, why we get in these problems. I hope today's discussions are going to shed some light on that. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Tobias and then Xiangchen. Thank you.
Should I also take the microphone? Can you hear me? No, microphone. Okay. I have the tendency to talk at the level of background noise. Okay. So I'll just repeat as an entry point some of the things that Yijing Song has said. Many of you maybe know the story of David Foster Wallace, a famous story. Two young fish swim. An older fish comes by and says, "Hey guys, how's the water?" Keeps on swimming. At one point, after a pause, one of the younger fish says to the other younger fish, "What the fuck is water?" So the reason why I have that there is from a philosophical perspective, one can say that we live by concepts, by a myriad of little conceptual presuppositions and assumptions about the world. And these concepts tend to be invisible for us. They're sort of background, and yet they're there and they shape how we think and how we do things. They shape how we understand or experience things. And as somebody who has spent almost 30 years now studying the history of thought, I'm really curious, where do these concepts come from? You sort of go back in time. The ones that we're familiar with disappear. Other ones appear that are slightly strange. And what Professor Sun and I have been doing, convened by Yijing Song, is trying to literally understand. It's almost like land surveillors. We are trying to understand where some of the most fundamental concepts that we live by come from. In our case, or today, is the concept of being, Sein, which is a concept that is not known in traditional Chinese thought, which is quite wild. What do you mean, not known? There's no concept of being, so let's jump in there. So we have, I think, 8 parts. I begin with part 1. So if one works through the Western history of thought, one finds that there's a lot of writing about being and what being is. But it's not just in the history of thought or in the history of philosophy. In the West, people generally, I assume most of the people in this room, assume that things are, that they have some form of essence or being or identity that defines them, that defines their truth. And if one sort of makes a schema out of this, it could look like that. Let's call that a conceptual configuration. And I do think that it's not an exaggeration to say that this conceptual configuration underlies a lot of the most taken for granted, most obvious things in Western languages or Western perceptions of reality or of self. And so what is surprising, and I remember distinctly when I read this first sentence in a book, is that most non-Western languages actually don't have a noun or a verb to be or being. How can that be? Like, things are not there? And of course, the obvious answer is, of course, things are there. They just don't have a word for it. But that's sort of saying, oh, they're just a little stupid and we figured it out. So it's not really a viable option. So the question is, do they have different concepts that constitute reality literally differently? And I use that word constitute like on purpose. It's not that they construct reality differently or that reality is differently. It's like a constitution that produces it, so to speak. So if one works through the linguistic records of, like if one reads ethnography texts or many of the non-European philologies, non-Indo-European philologies, one literally finds no trace of being anywhere. And so, slide. I can do that. Yeah. So in the canonical texts of Chinese philosophy, see, we color-coded. I'm gray and he's green. So in the canonical texts of traditional Chinese philosophy or traditional Chinese thought, the idea that things have an essence, that things exist as such, is nowhere to be found. Okay, so let's go in there. How did this configuration, this little conceptual configuration, come about? Being, essence, substance, identity, truth. One of the curious things about Western philosophy is that we actually sort of can name pretty much exactly the moment when this happened. And that is, if you work through the written record, you find that Parmenides was the first to use this Greek phrase, to eon, what is or being, as a substantive noun, as a noun that refers to something that is sort of independent of the noun, substantive. And when you work through that text that we have, which is a proem, a sort of ode to the muse that was in front of a text that is lost. The text was probably called Periphysius or on nature. When you work through that proem, you find that there's the sense that he made a discovery, that he had a recognition, but that he's groping for words. It's really difficult for him to articulate what he's trying to articulate, and I think one has that sense if one works through his writing, which is right at the intersection of archaic Greek and classical Greek. So the broader context of this is the physiologoi, which is the ancient Greek term for the pre-Socratics. They didn't call themselves pre-Socratics, obviously. They were interested in the physics of things, and physics is probably best understood from an agricultural perspective. It's an agricultural society, so people are interested in seeds and in how seeds give rise to something. And so what is the seed of things? What are the things, what is the permanence in things that sort of defines them? Thales is the first, most famous, talking about water as the actual thing that matters, and then the other pre-Socratics or physiologoi speak about earth and fire and air. There's a clear sense that the haptic is unreliable because things change all the time. Today they feel like this, tomorrow today it feels hot, tomorrow it feels cold. So that cannot be the answer. So there is this question about what are things made up of? And so this is the first few sentences of the proem of Parmenides. And you see, it's like an ode to the muse. He's basically taken on a chariot. Immortals take him to a goddess, Daimonos, the sun goddess, and then comes the key sentence, which I will read for a second, and then go into the interpretation. So, but come now, the goddess says to him, I will tell you, and you, when you have heard the story, bring it safely away. And so the context is that he talks to somebody who's immortal and is supposed to bring it back to the mortals. So, which are the only path of inquiry that are for thinking or that are feasible, available for thought, who and I. And then he makes this distinction, the one that is estinte, and that is not possible for it not to be, is the path of persuasion. The other, that is not, Augustine, and that is right that it not be, This indeed I declare you to be a path entirely unable to be investigated, for neither can you know what is not, for it is not to be accomplished, nor can you declare it. What a strange sentence, right? So basically what he says, either things are or they are not. And you go like, yeah, duh. I mean, come on. But the way to think about this is this context, the physiologoi, and he's asking what is the permanence of things. And the discovery, to eon exists as a verb, or basically exists as a copula. So you say, trees are green, and are doesn't really serve a function in that sense. And so roughly what happens to Parmenides is that he goes like, trees are green. What is are? They must be. If they're not, they're not, right? So it's like the moment when somebody recognizes, because of a linguistic peculiarity, that being could be something, that things could have a being, that this are is much more than a fill-in world, basically a connector, that it could be something on its own. And that is literally what happened with Parmenides, that this transformation from a copula to a substantive noun, that being is discovered as something. So when you basically say trees are green, then you must assume that trees are. It's the only thing that you can think. If you think that they are not, you cannot think it, right? So that's literally the distinction that he makes. And he does not yet say, trees have a specific form of being, and cows have a different form, have a form of being that is different from trees. He just talks about being as such, as a uniform, infinitive substance of something. Okay, so he also says, and that's equally strange, for the same thing is being, is thinking and being. Why is this important? Well, if you go back to this slide, you see that there's already this connection that he says that there are two forms of inquiry. One is possible for thinking, namely when things are, and one is not when they are not. So there is a connection between discovering on the level of thought that something is, and when it's not, you can't think it, right? So the background to this phrase, for the same thing is thinking and being, is provided by the term nous, divine mind, intellect, Geist, however one wants to call it. The idea is basically that there is a divine mind. The divine mind produces thoughts, and these thoughts are literally the being of things. So humans can participate in this divine thought by a practice called noesis, sort of almost elevating yourself, participating in the divine thought. So you're in a more than human state, and then you're in that realm of being. You're sort of in a divine experience. Does that make sense? Okay. So complicated? Yeah. So imagine basically. Why are things? Well, because the divine mind thought them out. So the really real is not found on the level of matter. Matter is unreliable. That's the merely haptic. It changes all the time. So when you say trees are green, on what level does the recognition that things are, that being must exist, otherwise trees would not be, green would not be, on what level of recognition does it happen? It happens on the level of thought, right? It happens in the medium of thought. It doesn't happen on a level of investigation or something like that. So this recognition that things must be is an intellectual insight. And when you have that intellectual insight, then you're sort of, then you're congruent, or you're in the state of the nous. This is I go one slide back. I wrote there is a contrast between noesis and dianoia. Dianoia is, if you will, critical know-how or rational know-how. That's what an artisan, so to speak, would have. It's a technical term. Noesis, in contrast, is when humans participate in the divine mind, in the nous, by way of thinking. Okay, so sorry, it's complicated. So Parmenides is the first who sort of connects being as a noun, the idea that things are, with the divine, with something that is immortal, with thinking, and with truth. So I mentioned that for Parmenides, being is an infinitive. Like it's not that things have distinctive forms of being or beingness or something like that. It's just like an infinitive. So Plato, who called Parmenides' father Parmenides, basically assigned himself the task to conceptually develop that form of being further, to sort of think it through further, to invent a vocabulary to make it more thinkable, if you will. And I have just one piece of text that we can read together to see how Plato is doing this. And so, but Parmenides, said Socrates, each of these ideas, Plato is famous for eidos, for ideas. Yeah. Each of these ideas may be only a thought, noema, which can exist only in our soul. Now Parmenides answers, and he said, but is each thought a singular one, but a thought of nothing? And well, you cannot have a thought of nothing, right? So that doesn't work. So Socrates says that's impossible. So it's a thought of something. Yes, says Socrates. Parmenides goes on, of something that is or that is not? Well, of something that is, of course it has to be, right? And then Parmenides goes on, a thought of a particular something. This is new. This was not found in Parmenides. A thought of a particular something of which this thought recognizes it is in all those somethings as one and the same idea. So this goes back to trees. Is the idea of the tree the same in all trees or not? Yes, then will not the idea itself be that which is identified by thought? Okay, I recognize that something is a tree there on the level of thought, not on some haptic level. It's like it's an intellectual insight. Okay, so now there is this, this is basically the level on which insight happens. Then the one that is the same in all those particular somethings, that again seems inevitable. Well then, said Parmenides, does not the necessity which compels you to say that all other things partake of ideas oblige you also to believe that everything is made of thoughts, and all things, all that is, think, so that literally like in them is a kind of conceptual configuration that produces them, that organizes them, that makes them consistent. So in all trees is the thought of a tree, basically, that gives that tree this consistency. So the possibility of knowledge, of recognizing something, is on that level of thought. That may sound really strange, but when you do genetics today and you look at molecules or you look at what happens in a cell, you're not attending to what happens in this particular cell, in this unique thing. You actually also think conceptually. You have to learn to think conceptually, look through a microscope conceptually. So it's still on the level of concepts, but primarily that we might not think of them as divine concepts, though, but it's still on the level of thought that this happens. Okay, so I go forward just to say, so one of the things that people often say about Plato, ideas and divine ideas, and you close your eyes and you see them, I think that's mightily unjust to Plato, because it lacks, like it renders invisible the massive amount of concept work that Plato has to do. And one of the things that I find interesting is that Plato never tried to systematize his philosophy. He's almost an essayist. If one reads through his dialogues, it's not that they're not a set of coherent ideas or something like that, or consistent ideas, but he does not systematize it. It's much more essayistic, that he works through a dialogic form in order to discover these conceptual necessities. So, and he introduces a series of terms that make the infinitive of toeon, of being, specific. So the eidos, the idea of something, the noema, which is the divine thought, and is manifest in the eidos. Noemata are just is plural, and ousia, which is basically meaning substance, but is not yet a really technical term in Plato. That happens in Aristotle. However, I will not bore you and go deep into Aristotle. I just want to hint at him, because in the metaphysics, he introduces this idea of a science of being qua being. Right, there is a science which studies being qua being and the properties inherent in it in virtue of its own nature. So what is being qua being? This science is not the same as any of the so-called particular sciences, for none of these treat universally of being. Right, so particular sciences would be one branch of reality, if you will, of nature, of agriculture, or something like that. Then it's just one specific branch. So he's interested in being qua being, and what you would assume, if you would go into this, is that such a study will happen on the level of empirical research or something like that. But not at all. What Socrates does is that he actually analyzes the ways in which we can speak about being. He works out a systematic structure, which he codified in his 10 categories. And he thought that the structure that he discovered is literally the structure of reality. Like he broke through to the ontology of things. So there is like a direct continuity between the words that we have and things. Okay, so the most important part is that so what I hope I could convey a sense of is there is a key moment in the history of European thought with Parmenides where somebody stumbles across something. Trees are green. What is R? And that leads to being and the idea that being is somehow a universal substance, a space in which things are, which leads to the next step. Somebody tries to develop that conceptual insight of Parmenides further, like Plato, by inventing terms like eidos or inventing terms like ousia, which goes from being as a universal substrate to the specific beingness of things, to Aristotle working out this sort of, if you will, systematic, almost administrative concept of being. And pretty much the rest of Western philosophy from that time onward are footnotes and reworkings of that original insight. And philosophers disagree on 10,000 things. Of course they do. But the assumption that being is, that things have an essence, that they have an identity that is on the level of being, does not change, and definitely is sort of a key assumption in the everyday language, in the everyday experience of whatever we experience, that is there, that organizes us, that configures us. And so the assumption that in China this might all be absent is actually pretty wild, and that's what we now go into. Thank you.
Okay. Many thanks for your coming, and many thanks to the Berggruen and the Songbing for organizing such a conversation between the Western philosophy and the Chinese philosophy. I think it's interesting, and it's also a very meaningful for us, because the dialogue is not between the West and the East, but also help Chinese to understand ourselves clearly, because for the modern Chinese, they are influenced by the Western thoughts, Western philosophy deeply. And if you go to the Shanghai, Beijing, very similar to Berlin, and you feel comfortable, and you feel very similar. It's just like the ice, the ice mountain. Just the same word. It's the same mountain. But for Chinese, there are two words. One is the popular one. You have to go to the university. We not call the 书院, the Chinese traditional school, we call it university, and everything is similar to the West. But on the other hand, Chinese people, they are living in a secret world. They are Chinese, still Chinese. When they visit them, you say, oh, it's very strange. Why they have such reflect? So this is why we should to understand the Chinese philosophy or Chinese thought again. I think, thank you for Tobias, give us a very clear structure. This is the Western roots, the roots of the Western philosophy, or the origin of the Western philosophy. It's very interesting. In some sense, Western philosophy is very universal to the whole world, and everyone can understand it. For the Chinese students, they also study Western philosophy. It's okay, no problem. They apply for the PhD candidate in the German universities, no problem. But only they know Western philosophy very clearly and deeply. But on the other hand, you see, just like Heidegger said, the philosophy speak Greek, and just like the Tobias show us, this is the Greek. So, if philosophy speak Chinese, what is the they will show another picture, another structure. So I think this is very important, for the Tobias said, being is very important, and being have many various meanings, and being is the key role in the Western philosophy. It's the being qua being. It's the ontology. But it's very interesting. In Chinese, the scholar intellectual circle, they published and a lot of books and articles discuss about how to translate ontology into Chinese. Because in the ancient Chinese language, we do not need the corpora. We say the Xiangchen professor, it's okay. Do not need the Xiangchen is professor. Do not need this corpora. So it's okay. It's also a proposition, but we do not need such the being. These are the corporas. But another strange phenomenon is for the Western the language, the being or the is not only the corpus, but also means the exist. But for the Chinese, exist is exist, corpus is corpus. They never put these two things together. So I think Heidegger gave a very good summary. He called it the ontol logic. Actually, it's he summarized for the from the Hegel, the Hegel's logic. So it's Hegel's book is logic, but it's very very funny. It's never discussed about the logic. It's the ontology. But in his phrase, he also say this is a book about God. So this is the ontol logic. I think this is structure is very, very important. And for the Western philosophy, if you know this, then you can know the whole structure of the Western philosophy. But in the Chinese thoughts, in Chinese philosophy, we never have such a structure. So why this is important? Because just as the Tobias mentioned, Parmenides is, I think, is very important. This is the real starting point of the Western philosophy. When we read the textbook, they always say "tellus" is the first one, but "tellus" is very similar to Chinese, or some other philosophy are very similar to Chinese philosophy. But Parmenides, I think, is the most important. And what has said the 2000 Western philosophy is just the footnotes of the Plato. Maybe I want to change it. I think for the 2000 Western philosophy, just the footnotes of the Parmenides, because we always confused with the Parmenides with other pre-Socratic philosopher. But I think it's totally wrong, because why the Parmenides is the most important? Because of the being. He take advantage of the Indo-European language, and by use of the being to finish abstraction, and then he have a concept, the being, and then the philosophy can reflect, give the reflection based on this being. But for the Chinese thoughts, we have no such word, no such concept. So it's another way. So I will show another picture to you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So for the Parmenides, being, the Plato's Eidos, or the Aristotle's form, they all say it's timeless, it's unchanging, it's eternal. But for the Chinese, the first book is the book of change. But when we say something about the Chinese philosophy, we always say Confucianism, Lao Tzu. But I don't think this is a good starting point, because when you read the Confucius analect, just sentence by sentence, what do you mean? And Hegel say, well, this is not philosophy. This is just the grandmother's moral teaching, and it's too easy. And he said, "Oh, why Confucius have such a high reputation in China? If we do not translate it into German, it's okay. It's have a very good reputation. Otherwise, when after your translation, wow, it's too easy. It's a lower than Cicero," he said. We know Cicero in the Western tradition is just a second rank, but but I think so. This is not a good starting point for understanding Chinese philosophy. Lao Tzu is also it's a philosopher, but I think before this philosopher. We have some classics we call the Book of Change and other official we call it the canon, the canon or classics there, and all these philosophers actually is the interpret all these classics. So it's similar to the maybe like the Christianity. So if you want to know the Christianity, I think you only read what Jesus say and cannot understand. Maybe you should know what does Peter say, what does Paul say, what does John say. So this is the reason why we need to read all this the interpretation of these canons. So the first the canon we call it the Book of Change. We call it the Yijing. So you see, for the Western philosophy, the first category is being. But maybe for the Chinese philosophy, the first category is becoming or the changing. So, for what has said, the Western philosophy is the footnotes of the Plato. But maybe if we want to understand Chinese philosophy, the whole Chinese philosophy is the footnotes of the Heraclitus. It's always changing, always changing. So if we base on the change or based on the being is never moved. So I think it's totally different. So what caused this change? We call it the yin and the yang. And then we call it this, the process is the Tao, the way of changing. So this is, I think, it's most important things is yes, we also say something stable one, or say something consistency, but the change is the first category, and then we have the two forces: it's the positive or the negative, or like the man, female, and so it's the two. It's the Chinese binary. It's Chinese way of binary. So yin and yang. So this is the basic forces. And then what is the prototype of the change? It's not the physical moving. It's not the chemistry change. It's the produce and reproduce, and the production and reproduction. So the prototype is life, and not only your life, the life after life, generation after generation. This is the prototype of the change. So, and then he said, what cannot be measured about yin and yang? We call it numerous. So if we read Aristotle, the God is a unmoved mover, is never moved. But this is God. But in Chinese language, what is God? God just means you cannot grasp something, you cannot measure something. So this is I think it's totally different. Yeah, thank you. So this is about the book of changes, and you see this is something for which it is impossible to make the definitive laws. So maybe for the Western philosophy, they always pursue the definition of the definite. So this is the impossible to make the definitive laws, since they are doing nothing but keeping pace with the changes. Just what is the stable? Just you following something, follow. Yeah. So it's not like from the Aristotle to Kant, the category structure, and just and this structure will do something, just keeping the pace with the changes. Yeah. And so this is the what it mean? The Yijing, Yi just means the Chinese character is the moon and the sun. Then what? Because Chinese character is how to say, the pictographer, pictographer language. So it's just like a picture. So put the sun and the moon together is the E is the changing. Yeah, and oh no, this is the reason why we use this book, because if you read the Lao Zhuang Confucius, it's like the moral teaching or something like that, or the political philosophy. But the Book of Change offer us so-called the ontological structure or the cosmological change, the structure. So this is the reason we should start from the the change of book, yeah, the book of change, yeah. And another one is very interesting. Why Chinese philosophy and focus on or pay more attention to the change, because this book, the Book of Change, it's originally it's a book of divination. It's a divination. In the Western philosophy, especially the Plato's Republic, they say the tension between the poetry and the philosophy. So poetry, the tension between poetry, but for the Chinese philosophy, it's a philosophicized or the rationalized the book of the divination. So for them, uncertain and always change, and so. The Chinese philosophy originated from the concern. For the Aristotle, Western philosophy originated from the wonder. Wow. But for the it's concern. What is the anxiety, the uncertain? Yeah. So, and another reason is just as Tobias said, the Western philosophy is dualism. This is the eidos. This is a sensible word. So this is toward. This is essence. This is phenomena. But in the Chinese philosophy, they always in one word. There are no such binary. It's a one word. But there are three fundamental elements: heaven, earth, and human being. And then you just for the human being, just one of the three. So for your action is just among these three fundamental elements, and their interaction each other. So it's very difficult to grasp something. So this is the Chinese philosophy is originated from the concern about your fate, concern about your life, concern about everything here. And so this is so it's not concern about the truth. it's a concern about the how to say the calamity. So this is the bottom color of the philosophy, Chinese philosophy. Yeah. Yes. Okay. And another one is very interesting. We call it if you want to get a better sense of how Chinese thought. If we use this book, the Book of Change, the Yijing, what is important, a very special term, we call the Xiang. Its meaning, it's a direct meaning is the image. It's an image, but this word is not related to the vision, to what you see. Its original meaning is elephant. It's an elephant. So why you use the elephant to stand for the image? Because a scholar in 3 century BC, Han Feizi, he said this word is describe the remain of elephant. So it's not a real elephant. It's the remains of an element. So you see this remains of you can imagine a real one. So this is what is called the xiang or the image. This one is a very special because for the Western philosophy, this is the abstract concept, and this is the concrete one. This is a very vivid one. Yeah. So but this Xiang is just in the middle of it. It's not very abstract. But as a maze of the elephant, it's also in some sense the abstraction. It's a natural abstraction. It's not a real one, but some born of the element. So for the Chinese way of thinking, you should grasp this image, and then use your imagination. So this is in some sense, it's a hint, and it's not the concept. It's not the essence. It's just to give you some hint. Then you based on it to imagine it, to think something. And if you put different image together, then you can create a very complicated world. So it's not a very in Western science, it's not a very philosophical. It's very poetry. It's very like a poetry. Put the different images together. Yeah. But this is its original meaning. This is because the Book of Change is a book of the divination. It's focused on the fortune and telling. So according to this Xiang, according to this image, then you can know what is the fortunate or misfortunate. So this is the. But the Chinese philosophy, based on this divination book, to develop a philosophy, it's a rational one. So in this book they have two parts. One is the original text. It's the book of the divination. But based on it, they give a lot of interpretation. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophy to describe the whole world. Yeah. And when we have such a level or such a structure, so do not like the Western philosophy. They are focused on the concept, then conceptual structure. But for the Confucius say that the writing does not exhaust words, and the words does not exhaust ideas. So for the Chinese people, they do not trust the language. And they say, facing this changeable world, facing this, the rapid changeable world, we cannot grasp it, by language. The language just provide us some hint, provide us some the message, but it's not the real world. It's not the real life. So do not trust language. This is, I think, no matter for the Confucianism or the Taoism, they are always do not trust. But it's okay. They can provide something, but it's not But if you want to know something, the sage provide the Xiang, because Xiang give you a lot of possibilities. It's not the concept directly. It's give you a lot of the possibilities.
So maybe just to insert, like with Aristotle, there is a direct connection between words and the being of things, so to speak. So it's the exact opposite. If you like, Aristotle can work out the structure of reality or of ontology by analyzing how we speak and use different speak about being in particular, and here we learn that it's precisely not the connection between words and things. If you want to understand the sort of logic that underlies reality, you actually look at the shot, at which you like literally can imagine like an oracle. You throw the bones on the table, and there is a book that explains to you how to read this, and so the shot is sort of like a window onto the conceptual structure, if you will, that organizes reality. And it's remarkably different, like various in the West, it's discontinuity and permanence. Here, it's all about the various forms of change that affect everyday life and that speak to the worries or hopes or fears that people have. So very different.
Yeah, especially the Chinese character. It's not like the Western language. So it's this is the meaning, and this is the picture, and this is the reality. There is the triangle structure. Yeah. Okay. And yeah. So. Yeah, so this is the Chinese language. They always, focus on, emphasize on the change and the movement. And for the Heidegger, say, being and the time. Oh, it's a great shock to the Western philosophy, because he put the beingless, timeless, and the time together. But for the Chinese, the noun always to become a verb. So, and for the Chinese, we say that the 宇宙, the cosmos, or the 世界, world, these two Chinese characters, they always means space and time. They never, use the space to describe the whole world. They always put the time and the space together. So, for the Chinese people, being and time, of course, take it for granted. But for the Western philosophy, it's a great culture shock. Yeah. Okay, it's your turn.
So, I hope you can by now see the sort of project that we're trying to do. This is the kind of literal assumption that these conceptual little presuppositions that we live by, that we take for granted as we roam around in the world, might be different elsewhere, and they might be profoundly different, so that they really lead to different kinds of experience of self or of reality, which is quite remarkable. So maybe we said that Western philosophy started with the search for permanence or stability. Various Chinese traditional thought starts with concern, Chinese philosophy, which in the West led to a focus on or the Occident, if in ancient Greek we want to call that the West, but it leads to a focus on being, and in China it leads to a focus on change. And we wanted to focus on one more thing, on something that we both thought is very important, and that is the distinction between the individual, an individual being that we have, and family reference or filial piety in China, and we thought a lot about that. In some sense, there is no concept of individuality in ancient Greece or in the Middle Ages. So I tried to write that down. This will sound kind of counterintuitive, but I will try to articulate it and explain it. And without one of my teachers, Arbogast Schmidt, I could not have articulated this actually. So, in the 17th century in Europe, this Parmenides configuration around being led to a very peculiar concept, the concept of the individual. And strange as it sounds, prior to the 17th century, the concept of individuality, understood as a sort of deeply subjective everyday experience, this is me in the world, this is the perspective from which I think, does not exist. There are no documents about this. If you will, there are no documents about interiority. Now, each time I say something like this, somebody goes like, Augustine's Confessions, but they are precisely exemplary. They're precisely, so they're meant, so to speak, to represent an exemplary path or route. They're not meant to document his internal and prior subjective experience or something like that. Okay, so let's see. In Greek antiquity and in the Middle Ages, things had an identity, a discrete form of being, like we talked about toion as a sort of infinitive form of being, and with ousia, the concrete substance of trees. So trees have a particular ousia, humans have a particular ousia, and so on. So they have this form of being, and in that sense they have an identity. But this form of being was basically categorical. It was that you were human. It was not the being of this human or of this tree, but a tree was defined by belonging to a category of being. A human was defined by belonging to a category of being. And yes. So one step further. In the 17th century, this changed. Now, the key reference for this change always is Descartes. Now, if one would like tell the story much more carefully, one would have to go to nominalism and Duns Scotus and so on. So we zoom in on Descartes, so it's a little exemplary, so to speak, rather than refined. But let's do it. So Descartes says, "I think, therefore I am," and that's a really remarkable reversal of ancient Greek philosophy. Why? Well, in ancient Greek philosophy, remember, thinking and being is the same thing. The divine mind sort of thinks things, and therefore they exist and are thinkable for humans. So from an ancient Greek perspective, the assumption is, it is thought, therefore it is, therefore humans can think it. So if Descartes basically says, "I think, therefore I am," or therefore it is, if you will, then he makes his private individual form of thinking the baseline for the possibility of knowing something. So it's quite right. It's a privatization. It's basically, if in ancient Greek form thought, noesis is a sort of elevating oneself above one's individual being and participating in the divine thought. Descartes does the exact opposite. He grounds everything in the individual experience of a subject. Because when do you really know something, according to Descartes? When you see it clearly in your mind's eye, basically. So it's a very private, subjective experience. So this is no longer a thinking that is about participating in an eternal structure of reality, nor is it a form of self-objectification in terms of the nous, where I think something that is a divine thought, and thereby I sort of self-objectify in terms of ontology. It's no longer a way of participating or participating in the divine mind, of gaining glimpses of eternal truth. Instead, it's the search of an accurate representation of an individual subject or individual personal subject of how can I know the outside world, basically. Okay, so does that make sense? You know, this shift basically from thinking as a form of participating in the nous, where you sort of elevate about yourself, where you elevate yourself above yourself, towards a form of truth discourse that grounds in the individual subjective experience. This leads to a whole set of really interesting things in Europe. One is the emergence of portrait painting that tries to capture the subjective truth of an individual human being, which is remarkable, right? Not that portraits or sculptures do not exist before, but they're usually depicting somebody not realistically, but more according to types, and that changes or begins to change in the 17th century. Interestingly, first biographies or autobiographies emerge, the first documents where people document their everyday, subjective, totally banal experience begin to appear. We don't have anything like that from prior periods. And then there is this very famous story, which is in the history of thought, or in the history of Western philosophy, the first full articulation of individuality, if you will, from Leibniz. Leibniz visited the Contessa of Herrenhausen. Herrenhausen is Hanover, Herrenhauser Garten. Maybe somebody saw that. And the story that Leibniz reports is that the Contessa said to him, "There are no two leaves with the same structure." And Leibniz was very certain of himself and basically said, "That's totally fails." Because he thought that there's a limited set of forms. And so they picked, or that's the story, they picked literally thousands of leaves and they compared. And so Leibniz basically concludes, that's the anecdote, that no two leaves are the same, and what makes every leaf special is the way in which it is different from every other leaf. And that leads him then a year later to the sort of, this is 1985, this is 1685, 1687, to this formulation, it is not true that two substances, it's a reference to Aristotle, can be perfectly alike, differing only number. That which is not truly distinguishable from another cannot be truly distinct from it. So I'll make that story very short and try to summarize it like that. That which defines me, my singular, unique being, my essence or my individual truth, is that in which I'm different from everybody else. Right? It's my unique singular being. I'm discrete, I'm set apart, I'm bounded, I'm independent, I'm an individual. It's a very typical, I guess, modern formulation of individuality, but precisely such a form of self-experience, such a form of making sense of oneself does not exist in Europe, at least before that time. And so when we discussed, you often hear this, that in China people are a relational configuration, not an individual. We felt like we have to tell that story of how humans became individual, how this, leads, for example, to Kierkegaard, how this leads to Heidegger, etc. And I hand over again.
Thank you. And Tobias tell the story of the individual. And actually, if you know something about the history of the Western philosophy, the atheism is very similar to the individualism. And atheism is also influenced by the Parmenides. And Democritus, to use this the being to create his concept of the atom. And every atom is a tiny being. It's a tiny being. So in this sense, they always, from the being to substance, they always think about something regarded as an object, regarded as a substance, regarded as an atom. But it's an independent one, yeah. But for the Chinese philosophy, this is the Chinese classics of the Philippiety. It's also a very important book. And his first sentence is, you're a physical person with its hair and kin are received from your parents. We say the Chinese word, 身体发肤受之父母. So not an atom, not a substance, not an independent one. You receive your whole body, your life from your parents. So the focus is not the break, the autonomy. It's the continuity of being. It's you receive your life, body from your parents. So this is very important. If you're based on individual, based on the substance or the atom, then you create your philosophy, and of course it's various philosophical system, but the starting point's the same. But if you based on this regard this one as the starting point, the relationship, the continuity, you receive your body and your life from your parents, so it's a totally different starting point. So yeah. So this is the reason, for we described the cosmology in the Book of Change. So the further type of the change is the production and the reproduction, and the life or the ensuing production is the prototype of the change. So in this sense, what is important is the generation after generation. So the generation is very important. And in the Western philosophy, what is important is the wisdom, courage, temperance, or the justice. So for the Greek people, they put these four virtues together. Then they create the Greek polis. This is the polis. So this is very important. But for the Christianity, what's important is the faith, hope, love. Then we use these virtues to put the God and people together. But in the Chinese, the worldview, we have no such a personal God. We know polis, we only the family. So in this sense, and the whole picture is the generation of generation or production and reproduction. So what is important is to put different generations together. So this is what the Philippiety or family reverence mean. And the Chinese character, what is the show, the Philippiety? It's just the old man and the young man put these two parts together, create a new word we call the Philippiety. So it's also a picture, it's a young man to born an old man. So I think the logic is the same. This is what you care about, and how to understand the meaning of your life. So maybe for the Greek, these four virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. And for the Christian, and faith, hope, love. But for the Chinese people, this filial piety, to put a different generation together, is most important. That means you know where you come from and what's your future. So for Heidegger, say, being towards death. The death is the limitation of your life. But maybe if you read the Chinese classic books, the being is not only towards death, being towards the next generation, being towards the future generation. Your mother asks. Yeah. So this is just another picture. So being is not only your means your life, but it's also related to other people, especially for the young generation. So so in this sense, this is the reason why we pay more attention to the filial piety. So of all the creatures in the world, the human being is the most noble. And in human conduct, there is nothing more important than filial piety. So they put we call it, this is the beginning of the whole virtual system. Or we say 百善孝为先. So the all goodness, all good conduct based on the filial piety. So why they cannot understand it? Why they pay more attention to this one? This is the reason. So we should have a framework, the whole picture. Then you know why the filial piety is important. And maybe for the Western people, your first impression of the filial piety is the hierarchy, is the patriarchy. It's very negative, especially in the modern world. But if we use another word, we think about the asymmetry, relationship within the family. So it's so if we say we are equal, but according to Thomas Hobbes, if we are equal, the first possible is confront each other. So the symmetry is very important. We can explain how acts take place, how caring take place. So I think this is the maybe the positive meaning of the filial piety. Yeah. No, it not works. Yeah. So, but you say you only love your parents, you only love your children is very narrow. It's but it's in Chinese philosophy, the most important thing is they think this is the love. But Western philosophy we say there are a lot of analysis of the eros, the love between the man and the female, and the philia, the love among the friends, or the agape, the love between the God and the people. But they lost another typical love, the love between the parents and children. So in Chinese language, we have another term, Xiangchen. That means love between the parents and children. And then this is not only, of course, for this love, there are some limitation. That means the partiality. You will love your children, you love your parents. But for the Chinese philosophy, they say, but first of all, it's love. So we needed to extend it. And a master said the exemplary parents in their teaching on the family reverence do not travel daily from the one family to the next to meet with each of them individually. Their teaching of the family reverence is their way of showing respect for every father in the emperor. 天下 is all in the heaven. The teaching of the fraternal difference is their way of showing respect for every other brothers. So it's not only your family member, but to the whole of the human beings. Yeah. Okay. Finished. Thank you.
we're finished. Yes. So thank you for bearing with us to the end. I think the idea is that we have time for questions or for comments and discussion.
I think first, I want to actually, I have thought many things because I was thinking during the whole process of your thoughts, thoughts-provoking talks. I'm thinking one thing, that is what is lost during the translation. For example, even concerning the title of the Book of Changes. Because when we write "yi" in Chinese, so there is another interpretation of the writing, that is on the top, that is the sun. And at the bottom, it is the moon. That means in this very character, it doesn't only mean facility or change or easiness. It also, shows vividly, pictorially, the simultaneous changing two factors or competing poles in this process. So it's not just about the changes, it's also the two-ness in the whole structure. That means you cannot think about one existence. The existence could only be possible within the interrelation or interaction of another being. And this co-generation or co-beingness, coexistence makes the thought of change and thought of being possible. So this is only one thing I was thinking. And secondly, I think we talk about the translation of 世界 or 宇宙, but 世界 is also a translation of Buddhist scriptures into Chinese, because in the past we didn't made the differentiation between time and space. So through translation of at that time foreign thoughts, foreign philosophies, so these kind of thinking, which was alien to Chinese thoughts, could be possible through the long years. So this is another factor. So I think it's really difficult to say whether something is innate Chinese or, So this is also the meaning of think about a notion in its not just etymological sense, but also a historical, philosophical sense. But one thing, do I speak too long? Maybe I could give, we can talk about it. And also I'm concerning about some similarities. And whether, for example, Heidegger, when he translates things, he thinks also with Greek, ancient Greek language. So, for example, physis or being, he has tried to translate it into German as Gewissend. So the the time dimension was also put into expression through his interpretation into this very being. So the complexity of being in itself is also very fascinating when we consider all the differences. I think Hans wants to add something, things about the nominalists.
Okay, very interesting idea from Wang Ge, because she's asking, is there an origin of change, which might be stable, a stable relationship? Yeah. My question is completely different. whenever I'm traveling to China, I have the feeling that I lose my identity because I'm losing my identity towards an out view from Chinese who ask themselves, to whom is he related without identity? So this is a problem in communication. Yeah, do I have something like an identity, and even an identity if I lose my relation? What kind of identity is this? Is it explainable as a dignity of man, and so on? The second question. I think I really know what a chair is. I can identify a chair. But maybe when you choose the perspective to your idea of change, the kind of identification changes too. So there might be a lot of more differentiated chairs being able in China than in Europe. I don't know if you understand this question, yeah? A chair can be everything because it can change as a chair, yeah? And maybe, yes, you know the intrigue question from the Chinese nominalists, the sentence, "This white horse is not a horse," because the term horse is used in different circumstances as an individual and as an idea. So this sentence in the Chinese language does not make any sense to us. There is a kind of, let me say, confusion being able in the way we communicate to each other. And how can we overcome that kind of confusion?
Maybe do you want to? 最后一个问讲名家粉对吧？我知道，不然第一个 do you want to react？他是社会资本知道。
Okay, more challenges for me here. You know, as the offspring of the Homo species, you know, we are whole human being. We can understand each other, and you know, in this sense, you know, we are a lot of similarity and the commonality. So no problem. We can understand each other, and we also can explain the Chinese thought to you, and you also can explain the Western philosophy to us. No, I think it's no problem. And in the very beginning of the Chinese philosophy and the Western philosophy, there are many similar things. But what is the dominant structure? What is the dominant, the mainstream philosophy? I still think it's different. So this is very important. So we can understand each other. You know, for the human being, very easy. it's very similar. But different civilization, different culture, the focus on the maybe different. And based on this focus, they were developed different structure. I think this is very important. As you mentioned, the 世界 or 宇宙 translated from the Indian Buddhism into Chinese. But for the Book of Change, we call it the 十位, the time and the place, not the space, the timeless way, and always put it together. And they never, described the time or the space separately, but always put them together. This is, I think, the way of the Chinese thinking. And you said identity. Yes, just I mentioned that this is the you receive your body and your hair and the king from your parents, to give a picture about the relationship, and we always identify in this network. So this father, this mother, this son, this the brother, and this is a boss, and this is my character. Actually, it's your role in the whole society. So, in this sense, we do not use some very abstract identity to describe you. But for me, I think the individual is very important. Individual liberty, individual rights, individual everything is it's the basis for the modernity. And the people, you say that the dignity and all from this individual autonomy, the person. So we live in a modern world. So we can learn each other and no problem. But what I describe, it's also for the Chinese people it's very strange for them. So I just based on the classic text and logically to construct this structure, and then for the maybe for the ordinary people they influenced by this structure, but unconsciously, unconsciously. So, but as a philosopher, what we should do is to reconstruct based on the text. So if you say something with your Chinese colleagues or your they say, well, we know we are the same. We can understand each other. We communicate very easily. No problem. But if you go deeply, you find something strange. Then this traditional one is still play a great role in our daily life. And what's your?
I want to add something. It's actually, the story of the white horse we actually discussed in preparation of today. But because there are limited slides, we had to sort of reduce it by a factor of 5 because we had so many stories and slides. But one way to think about this is I'll use three simple examples maybe. So in logic there are formal systems, right, which have axioms, and so if you think about the story of Western thought, whatever that exactly is, or the story of Chinese thought, and I think both of us, nothing is further from us than saying there is some innateness or something like this. These are all conceptual histories, but there is there are possibilities of thinking things with Chinese concepts that are not mapping onto the possibilities of thinking things in Western concepts. The typical thing that philosophers have been doing for a long time is that they look for an equivalence. What's the equivalence of this Western concept in the Chinese concept? What's the equivalence of a Chinese concept in the Western concept? And quite all right, I have no critique to offer at all. That's important. That's part of trying to make sense and understanding. But what are the areas that are not overlapping? And the point there is not othering or something like that. The point is, can I increase the number of things I can think? Can I increase the number of possibilities of living a life? And so there is this beautiful phrase by Michel Foucault where he says, how to write history without relying on universals. Meaning, what is consciousness in Chinese? What is consciousness in ancient Greek? What is consciousness in whatever contemporary English? Well, then we all assume that consciousness exists and there are different representations. But as consciousness is a word invented by John Locke in 1696, it's probably not a universal. It's probably a regional configuration. So why declare it to be a universal and look for correspondences or equivalences in other languages? Rather look about why did that not exist? How to think differently? So that is one of the, I think our goal is neither to, we want to provincialize the West, but there's nothing to take away from the West. It's a beautiful thought tradition. We want to increase the number of things we can think by putting two philosophical traditions and calling them philosophical on purpose next to each other. And of course we want to expand, like the next workshop will involve thinkers from India and from Japan, and then we hope to expand to the Middle East and to Arabic philosophers, so that this, if you will, the total formal space of possibility of thinking gets both deeper and bigger. That's the goal.
I think that's a decisive point. Yes, I am not a Foucaultian thinker, definitely not, because I'm thinking that's a way of universal relativism. If you lose the focus on a theory, and if you only watching theories which are traveling from Europe to China, from China to America, and with a new face back to Europe. It isn't a theory. It isn't Marxism any longer when it comes from Europe to China. It changes its face. And you are saying that's necessary. I would say that's a loss of theory. So, do we need them? Do we need stable things? Do we need something like an expression like dignity, like human rights? Do we need to focus on stable things to say this is a chair, definitely, and not nothing other, yeah? And not a bank, and not a whatever. I think this is very important. And on the other side, your way to proclaim a universal change as an alternative is the opposite of that. But we have to find a way to take both sides into consideration. I think this is very important. But first of all, I only see contradictionaries.
Maybe there are also more questions. We can take it into your corner.
Actually, I'm just kind of quickly react to your questions. I think whether or not it is a chair, I sometimes use it as a desk. Sometimes I use it as a bed. I don't have to always define it as a chair, right? Depending on the context, how I'm using it. So, but anyway. Anyway, no, I have a question. It's actually, Tobias, you touched upon briefly on duality thinking in the Western context. And then and Xiangchen, you talked about Chinese binaries. You talked about yin, yang, man, woman. I just want you guys to go into little details about are Chinese binaries same as the dualities that Tobias is talking about? And if not, what are the differences? Maybe we can take on a few more questions if people have, and then they can address them. Anyone?
Yeah, I just have one more to kind of add to the pile. I'm wondering how much you can actually understand these things as fundamentally distinct, right? There's so much talk in this conversation about this like fundamentally Western perspective and a fundamentally Chinese perspective. But if we're honest, these cultures have been, and philosophers have been reading each other for centuries, right? It's maybe perhaps misreading even. But if that's the case, can we really speak about them in such distinct ways? And if not, what's the consequence of that? Where are they as a result of that interchange now, after, you know, at least 500 years of intersection?
Yeah.
So they can get, yeah.
So for me, the interaction between it, and I'll try to answer in reverse. For me, the interaction between the two is not taking anything away from the question, can I think things in Chinese that I would not be able to think in the West? It's not that there's no overlap, it's not that there have not been borrowings from both sides. And all of that is very interesting. But it's basically this conceptual focus, right? So I like, when you think about this sort of how taken for granted, we take this idea that things have an essence or a being, and then you go back and read Homer and you don't find it in there. Let's say you read Hesiod and you don't find it in there, and then you read Parmenides and you find, oh wow, this it's as if he stumbles upon something. Things must be, otherwise they're not. You know, it sounds so obvious, but was probably an intoxicating thought for him, for which he did not have proper vocabulary to express. It literally did not yet exist. And so you trace how the vocabulary around being developed in the West. And you trace basically how the kinds of things that we can think today, the way that the structure of our experience, if you will, is emerging over time. So that's just a conceptual analysis. It's almost like, if you will, without, like, the more refined your vocabulary is, the richer your vocabulary is, the more things you can think, the more refined you can experience yourself. And then you recognize that there is a thought tradition that has overlapped and have interacted, but the conceptual structure of which is different. The logic of association that connects things is different. The way that reality is articulated and experienced is different. Well, then you become curious about these conceptual differences, right? So this is just, in some sense, the goal is definitely not to say who's right or who's wrong or something like this. The goal is to basically measure these. Measure is actually a good term, and the goal is to measure these different opportunities for thinking or for being, for living a life, and to articulate them. Is there overlap? Yeah. Have they borrowed from each other? Oh yeah, no, heavily. Yeah.
How do you measure that thing when you don't even understand your own place as something that's... I guess I'm just concerned because so many of these reference points...
If you're concerned, you should consult the Yijing.
Only, like, it's almost as if pretending the last 150 years of contemporary philosophy hasn't existed, but there's been an enormous amount of conceptual change in both of these traditions that are borrowing from each other from this cross-reading, where I would say that even this stable understanding, these fundamentals, could have altered themselves. So if that is the case, how can you even measure that? It itself, as a conceptual framing, starts to fall apart. And that's what I'm trying to...
not. So you would have... So first you have to show me the 150 years of Western philosophy that has heavily borrowed from Chinese traditional thought. I'd be really curious to find it. And the second part is, like, why would it fall apart? When you do a linguistic analysis of concepts, gedankliche Zusammenhänge, then it's quite easily feasible and possible. What's complicated about it?
I don't think it's that simple and very complex. A lot of people have done plenty of textual analyses and tried to understand concepts from different traditions and written about them prosaically. And in that process of adjusting their own concepts, that's what I'm saying. I just think it's a bit... I wonder if this stable ground of these two traditions is really as stable as it seems. I agree, it's a great and important project to get different perspectives on things. I'm just wondering how far away are they now after all of these hundreds of years of interchange?
Well, was everything that Professor Sun said today familiar for you?
Somewhat, yeah.
Good. That's awesome. What else to say? Was it familiar to you that being has a history, or that individuality didn't exist before the 17th century? Cool. Then you're our exemplary interlocutors, and we're grateful for it.
But I think, even for the Chinese, I don't think they are very familiar with what I say. For the ordinary life, for our real life, it's a fusion of the Western and the Eastern and the ancient and the modern. It's our real life. But there are big tension, especially in the un-Western world. The Western is not in the name of the Western, in the name of the modern, in the name of the modernity. So this is modern world, this is modern society. But on the other side, this is a Chinese one, this is an Indian one, this is an Arab one. So the big tension, within our, it's a real problems. But they do not know why we have such a big tension. Why we cannot doing something smoothly, because we lost our own. We forget our own structure. For example, for 100 years, our Chinese scholar want to reconstruct, the history of the Chinese philosophy. And they graduated from the Columbia University. And then they used realism to rewrite Chinese philosophy. And then after 15 years, another scholar said, no. That scholar, totally do not know the characteristics of Chinese philosophy. So he even do not know the concept of the subjectivity. So we should use the subjectivity to rewrite Chinese philosophy. So this is another version of Chinese philosophy. But totally wrong. It's not Chinese philosophy. They lost a lot because they used the Western framework. They used the Western the standard. With the Western philosophy as a standard, then to construct, then lost a lot. So I think it's it's the beginning. We to rethink about our tradition, use its own framework. So I think this is the what is useful or the utility of this work. I don't know. It's an intellectual work. Just do it. Yeah.
Actually, I understand what you're referring to, and can I just share some of my thoughts and thinking on this? Is that I think in the past 150 years, definitely there was a lot of exchanges between different cultures and civilizations, and then there's a lot of a mutual understanding. On the philosophical front, I would say more Chinese and Asians learned about Western philosophy than the other way around. I mean, I'm not talking about the people who might be spending a lot of your own time doing Chinese philosophy, but as a general phenomenon, there's more sort of understanding or try to align the East Asians in general trying to align ourselves to the Western thinking for 150 years, right? And then, but doesn't mean that some of the foundational structural things that shaped who we are have shifted, substantially. So in a way, because that's still our personal life, social life, family lives, you see them everywhere. Those are the things goes really deep, and you don't even realize they're influencing you. So that's the time that sometimes because I've done some research about social acceptability of AI and robotics in various societies, and then so surveys show that there's much less of existential the concern about existential risks in societies like China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, when it comes to AI and then robotics. Because there's all these discussions about, it's going to be a worry about AI taking over the world and this and that. That kind of concerns is much less in those East Asian societies. And that makes you wonder why. And then that's why some of our work are looking into that. And then, you can't just use, because, if you read the commentaries about the this kind of survey results, if it comes to China, people just, those people are ignorant, the government are suppressing the information, they don't understand, You cannot use the simple democracy versus autocracy to explain this phenomenon. You got to go into the deeper structural philosophical construct that shaped those societies for millenniums. That's when those kind of research become very meaningful. And then, I think Professor Sun, Xiangchen, Professor Sun, maybe he did not have much of a time to explain, for example, in this integrative structure of heaven, earth, and humans, this kind of it's a one world view. This one world view actually has a lot of influence, because when we go back, when we're trying to think about this one world view, may have shaped the social attitudes towards technologies, which may one day become more powerful and more intelligent than us. I think in that kind of a framework of thinking, human beings have been living with powerful celestial beings, let's say in Taoist religion, for thousands of years. If we have another, the Taoists would say, if we have another set of, AIs and machines, and then they're more powerful, maybe we're creating a new celestial sort of a pedigree, I mean, it's nothing, they never really consider it in the existential kind of level of risk. I mean, so times like that, you have to go back to that level to really understand, what's shaping the social attitudes and cultural attitudes to certain things that, that we see around us. It's not just, I point out that tip of iceberg. You can't just use the tip part to really explain. You really have to go down further to understand some of the issues. Anyway, I'm just sort of sharing the significance of this kind of work for us to have a better understanding, or the phenomena around us, and then what is the deep philosophical basis for that kind of differences.
I think it's also important. We have no missionary impulse. We're not here to convince anybody. We don't sell any truths. We just try to do some conceptual work together.
A question to Xiangchen. In your last speech, you said that in the last 20 years, the Chinese philosophy tried to discover its own philosophy with Western terms, anew. And you criticized that, and I think you said they failed because these were concepts who were stable and who could not be projected on the weight of Chinese thinking. And maybe I give you right. The reaction today is that Chinese philosophy wants to discover itself anew, but without Western influence, without impacts from outside, by their own. My question now is this not a kind of isolation which goes in the wrong direction because it loses the way to communicate internationally about that problem? And that's another aspect of the question is that you, of course, said all we Western don't know anything about Chinese philosophy, don't know, really know in a deeper sense something about the Chinese culture. And vice versa, the Chinese know lots of the Western culture, they adopted it and so on. But my complaint is the Chinese culture is very assimilative. It adopts lots of things from the outside, whereas the Western culture puts it out, lets it out, yeah, in a way that it might be ignoring what coming from the outside and could put us in problems. In this situation, it would be better when Chinese universities and Chinese strategies of education would do the same what we have done to China, go out and teach Chinese philosophy in the West. But this isn't happen. The only place where it happens is my university in Germany. It's the only one, yeah, who does it, yeah. But it doesn't happen anywhere else, not in the rest of Europe.
So thank you so much. Very, very good question. And you said that the first one is let me see. 这第一个问题是什么来着？我这下。Yeah. You know, we have three patterns. You know, first of all, we regard the Western as some progressive, and the Chinese is backward. So our strategy is throw away our tradition and then accept a brand new one. This is the first pattern. The second one is we regard the Western as a universal one. It's very universal. We are the particular one, and then we should to become more universal. And this, but you know, originally, just you mentioned the Lebanese, you know, the 17th century, 17th century, the Lebanese regard these two different culture, and we should learn each other. So there are three patterns, you know, for our relationship. But now, you know, for the Western philosophy, they are also face a lot of challenge and the crisis. And I love Heidegger's philosophy, but not his political attitude. You know, he tried to overcome, you know, the Western dominant tradition, and he said, "Oh, the Western philosophy forget the being. Forget the being actually is to be. So this is, I think, influenced, by the Japanese philosophy or tradition. This is, I think, is quite good. This is what we want to do, to open, not to the isolate. It's an open world to learn more from the other place. But for the Chinese itself, it's the same. Because of the the pattern of the progressive and the backward or the universal or the particular. So we are the filial one. So we what we need to just to copy the other one. But the life is the real life. We are still Chinese, and they still play. I do not say good or wrong, good or bad, and right or wrong, but it still works. So as a philosopher, we know we have to do what happens, what it works. So we need to just go deeply to know. Of course, for the philosophy, all we do to do is just logically. It's not to describe our real life. It's logically, what is the this structure, what is that structure. So I think this is the what we do. But I don't think I just do a very isolated work, because for me. What is the philosophity? It's not just obey to the authority of your parents. No, I say, what is the philosophity? It's connection between the different generations. This is what I do. This is what my new explanation of the philosophity. And if you do this one, it's very important. It's not just a hierarchy, patriarchy. It is the cross-generation. If we are saying something about justice, I don't think justice is a proper term to describe the relationship between the different generations. Maybe the justice is maybe no problem around us, but if we want to describe the relationship between the our generation and the future generation, maybe justice is not a good term. So when we read and think about the traditional one, we want to get some inspiration or the resources, and then to enrich our thoughts in the contemporary time. So this is what we want to do. It's not absolute. It's just want to, for the Heidegger say, being in the world. I say, no, it's not enough. Maybe being between the generations. Heidegger say, being towards death. I say, no, maybe the being towards next generation. This is the dialogue with the contemporary philosophy.
Can I add a comment that in a way that I think some of the discussions here, especially when Professor Sang is talking about sort of rediscovering the roots of Chinese philosophy, this is not about going back to ancient days and then revive what was the notions and the practices then. It's really sort of to infuse the ancient thinking with modernity, with the Western thinking, and then try to reinvent the traditions that the Chinese have been having for thousands of years. It's like all philosophies go through various iterations, right? So in a way, like China is going through going through a new iteration of its philosophical tradition. It's just like in the Western tradition, democracy. This concept has been around for thousands of years. But ancient Greece democracy, and in terms of the practices, are they exactly the same as what you're doing right now? Clearly, they're not, right? So again, it's saying it happens to each tradition. You go back to your ancient tradition. You sort of reinventing it along the way. It's that I think from China's point of view, about 150 years actually, the dominant thinking is throw your things out of the window, And then you think you can remake yourself in the image of Westerners, not in the image of God, in the image of Westerners. But, after 150 years and this and that, yes, you changed a lot, okay? It's really on the tip of the iceberg part. You changed a lot in terms of modern institutions and notions and values and this and that. But you realize something, it's always there and never changed. So it's worth going back to see what are the things that still work in the Chinese societies, and then in what way we could sort of reinvigorate. But then infused with the new thinking. So it is evolving, you know. So anyway, that's just kind of I think that's kind of also the significance of this kind of exercise and this kind of work, I would say.
I don't know. Maybe my entry point is slightly different. I think there might be two entry points. One has a lot to do with Yukui. Many of you will probably know him. Was also a Berggruen Fellow, was a philosophy professor in Hong Kong, now in Rotterdam. And Yuk and I had lots of discussions about, is there something like Chinese philosophy, properly speaking? Because the term philosophy, you know, used as a technical term first by Plato, means something very specific. And this kind of specific practice that Plato basically referred to simply does not exist in Chinese texts as far as we can tell. And so, like Hegel making funny comments about Confucius, you know, Needham and the Chinese are organic thinkers, thereby indicating that they're pre-modern and so on and so forth. So, in some sense, what made Chinese philosophy interesting was that it's a representative of an ancient culture or ancient civilization. So contemporaneity between traditional Chinese thought and traditional Western thought was not possible, basically. It's sort of the West is here, right, and it's contemporary, and abstraction and concepts, etc., are very important, and Chinese is down here. So if it's true that many of the Western concepts that we discussed today, from being to individuality, feel exhausted or insufficient or unfortunate, or one looks for other ones, then for Yuk, there has always been then, his new book, Post-Europe, what happens in that moment is that there is a chance of contemporaneity, basically of Zeitgenossenschaft. So it's not one is located in the past and is a representative of something that is finished, and the other one lives in the now and lives in the future. There is a contemporaneity. Now, that doesn't answer at all, like should Chinese thinkers articulate their philosophies through their encounter with the West, or should they sort of isolate or not? Separate question, but it touches on one important thought for creating contemporaneity between different traditions. Another thought is another entry point that I think is important is this goes back to I don't know your name, so I say what you said. You know, in terms of stable ground or so, or going back and authentically recovering, restructuring what traditional Chinese thought was, or what Parmenides exactly thought, or something like that. Of course, that's funny, right? Of course, we interpret this from today's perspective in our situation, and I just articulated one of those situations, namely that Western concepts might have lost some of their self-evidence, and therefore we look more broadly and we read them. And of course, nonetheless, there are opportunities of entering texts and asking, what is the sort of thought space, the sort of capability, the possibility of thinking that is implicit in a text, even if I do this from today's perspective, that is seems to be logically different from the way that thought has developed in the West. And one can sort of try to articulate that, not to essentialize or something like that again, but to create this contemporary overlap, if you will, between these different thought traditions. Anyway.
I think we have time for one last question, if there is. Looks like not. So we can end here, right?
Yeah. I actually want to add one more thought, because you know when I was studying philosophy in Tübingen and Heidelberg with at the time with Rüdiger Bubner was my professor, he would say, being was discovered. It was being articulated. Of course, being has always been. How could that be otherwise, right? So it is basically this discovery moment. And I do think that taking a step back and saying, what if it was not discovered? What if it's just literally a concept? I do think that taking that thought serious in all its radicality it happens very rarely. The number of contemporary publications that are on becoming are totally indebted to being as a concept. There is like no radicality on that level. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done on that radicality of conceptual thinking. Anyway, thank you so much for bearing with us and for coming. Thank you.
It's not.